Welcome to Generally Speaking, the off-season edition. I'm your host, Angelo Fioris, also known as @NJ_Generals on Twitter, part of the USFL Today. Follow me and the @USFL Today account on Twitter for all the news, notes, and information about the USFL. No one covers the USFL like the USFL Today. All right, USFL and Generals fans, this is a really special show for me. I'm really excited to bring on my next guest. He's my favorite sports author, and I've read a lot of his books. He is the author of The Bad Guys Won. He's the author of Sweetness. He's also the author of Football for a Buck, which is about the original USFL. So without further ado, I bring on Jeff Pearlman. Jeff, welcome to Generally Speaking.
It is very rare that I'm on a show with someone who knows more about the USFL than I do, but I feel like here I am. I feel like your knowledge probably dwarfs mine, and I am in awe.
I don't know about that, Jeff. I will come into this conversation saying that we are likely on a par, but you've got an edge on me because what I thought I knew everything about the league, but then when I read Football for a Buck, and I sent you a note after I read the book when it came out, where did you uncover some of these stories? Because I thought I really did know everything, and then every chapter revealed something else that I wasn't aware of. So kudos to you for digging as deep as you did.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, the one thing is about book research is you call people. Like the one thing that happens when time passes is the same stories tend to be regurgitated over and over again, which is understandable because new people aren't telling their stories. It's not like since 1985, 86, people are telling new USFL stories nonstop. People aren't asking. So when you're an author or journalist or whatever, and you take the time to call Greg Fields and you take the time to call Chuck Fusina and all these different guys from the USFL, all of a sudden they're telling these stories and they say, you should call this guy. And, oh, you should call this guy. And then you're not just calling the stars, you're calling offensive linemen, and you're calling assistant coaches, and you're calling cheerleaders, and then you build up this huge database of stuff that's never been told. And that's when you learn. And that is when you learn that a member of the San Antonio Gunslingers had his penis slammed in a trunk and had to be put on the IR.
With a groin injury.
Literally a literal groin injury. His penis was slammed in a trunk.
That is an unbelievable story, and probably my favorite one from the off the field antics that took place. One of the wild characters of the original USFL to me was John Corker, who was just his own man. He marched to his own drum, but was still just a beast on the field.
Oh yeah. So Michigan Panthers had been a Pittsburgh Steeler. Was a gifted player in the Jack Lambert way. A guy is gifted, like could have been that level, had drug problems. My favorite story, I think, or the one that pops in my head, it's been a while, was he and Bobby Hebert have to drive somewhere to make an appearance. And Bobby Hebert is the quarterback of the Panthers, and Corker's been around, and Corker says he'll drive, and it's Michigan and snowing, and the road is icy. And Hebert just described this ride from hell where Corker's smoking a joint, driving the car, skidding all over the road. Hebert thinks he's going to die about 17 different times. There's another one where Corker, who did have substance abuse problems, fell asleep on the ice at Joe Louis Arena and woke up sort of like in the way of A Christmas Story, woke up with his face stuck to the ice and had to sort of have his face removed from the ice. So Corker, there's a million Corker stories.
There is. I have one of my own. A few years later, there was a league called the PSFL, which never got out of training camp, but I did have the good fortune of working there at the time, filming training camp as one of the video guys. And John Corker was on our team, the Arkansas Miners. So I got to interact with John, and we asked him one day if he was still partaking in the smoke. And he's like, nah, not anymore, but I still enjoy. And he kind of pointed to his nose, and we had a laugh. And I remember speaking to a coach saying Corker was looking like a beast in camp. And the coach said, well, let's hope he passes the test. So
it's interesting, actually. Like, if you look back, actually being sincere about this.
Yeah.
Nowadays, marijuana, no big deal. It's legal in a lot of places. It should be legal. I don't even smoke, but I just think it should be legal, obviously, blah, blah, blah. And so many players were demonized. So many guys, so many pro athletes were demonized for smoking marijuana. And it really sucks because you're playing a physically violent game. Your body is getting decimated. Your mind is getting decimated. And I think for a lot of those guys who are, facing the criminalization of marijuana, it could have really made their lives a lot easier and should have made their lives a lot easier. I'm not saying cocaine, But it is interesting how many players were suspended through the years in baseball and football and basketball for a drug that should have been legal the whole time.
Right. And at least now the attitudes are changing towards it, and athletes can now be at least have the choice if they want to help them with alleviate some of the symptoms of getting
and it doesn't
around.
And it doesn't label you anymore. Like that's the thing that really bothered me. I think there was a lot of judgment, especially against African American athletes, if we're being honest, who, oh, he's a druggie and he's from the streets and now he's using drugs and blah, blah, blah. And he's a bad guy. And meanwhile, we would write about I'm talking about literally reading the pages of SI and then writing there. We'd write about some white Christian athlete and we'd say, he's the kind of guy who goes to church every Sunday. And meanwhile, we're juxtaposing him with the guy who smokes pot. Like pot is, like licking the devil's boots. It's
right.
It's a really poor look for old sports writing.
Yeah. And at least the attitudes have changed now and things are different regarding that. So the old USFL, who was your favorite team?
I was a Generals fan growing up. It's funny because I'm the biggest Trump hater of all time, but I grew up in New York. I love the Generals. I said to you when we just started this call, I see on your wall, the framed Sports Illustrated cover of Herschel Walker hitting pay dirt. I remember going to my library in Mahopac, New York as a kid. I was 11 years old at the time, and seeing that cover and then opening it up, I'm sure you can picture in your head too, and the spread of all the helmets.
Yeah.
And being like, holy crap, this is the coolest shit ever, and like just being blown away by the coolness of it all. And the Generals are our hometown team, local team.
Right.
They had Bobby Scott at quarterback, the former Saint. They had Herschel. They had Maurice Carthon in the backfield. Their Chuck Fairbanks was their unimaginative first-year coach.
So boring.
J. Walter Duncan owned the team. I was really excited. I love their uniforms, even though in hindsight they weren't the greatest USFL uniforms. They were still kind of cool. And they sucked. And then Trump came in. I do always say this, I will say. I could make a lifetime off of bashing Trump as a president and all he did for the USFL. Negative. He spent a lot of money on that team and he made them good. So I can't, when people say, oh, blah, 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 I say, I will give him credit. He was a pretty good owner for that team. Now, I don't think his intentions were great. He wanted an NFL franchise. But if you look at the results on the field and the players he brought in, it's hard to argue.
Hey, they went from 6-12 and, like you said, unimaginative and boring to 14-4 in that second year with Walt Michaels as the head coach. So things turned around very quickly with that influx of talent from the NFL, like Barbaro and Lapham and Brian Sipe and some of the other guys. Leclerc, another great player from Cincinnati, right, that came over. So he definitely did a good job in building that team and turning it around. I chat sometimes with Bobby Scott on Twitter, and he's fun to chat with because he'll tell me stuff once in a while. And he told me that he would get so angry sometimes when it would be like 3rd and 8 and Chuck Fairbanks would call for a running back plunge into the line. And, in those days, there was really no recourse for a quarterback to change plays, right? They either ran what was called or they didn't run anything.
Yeah, it's actually funny. You look back and the game has really changed so much. It's apples and oranges. If you took any NFL team right now, or even USFL team right now, and put them in that old USFL, like remember at the time the Houston Gamblers offense seemed revolutionary, which it was.
Right.
We get 4 or 5 wide receivers. We're not even going to have a fullback on the roster. We don't need a tight end. Blah blah blah.
Tight end.
You could take the worst NFL team now, and their offense would blow away anything those USFL, especially that first year. It's not like Chuck Fairbanks was out of the mainstream. He was super mainstream. It's like, we're going to run, we're going to have a fullback, we're going to have a halfback, we're going to have a tight end, we're going to have 2 wide receivers, and that's it.
Right.
And so he wasn't necessarily a bad coach. He was just a very conventional coach.
Yeah, that's pretty much what the NFL was running at the time for their offenses. It wasn't like they were lighting up the scoreboard at the time. And that was part of why the USFL was able to get a foothold, because the NFL was kind of in a very boring state. Their Super Bowls were blowouts and it wasn't imaginative at all.
And I would argue that, like, in a way, so if you look at the wave of coaches coming into the USFL at first, like the whole big name coach thing was a big deal. Right? Chuck Fairbanks was a big name. George Allen was a big name.
Right.
But it wasn't until guys like June Jones, who wasn't that well known, like Mouse Davis, who wasn't that well known, came along, saw the USFL, saw that they weren't going to get the great receivers, but we could get these really fast 5'8" guys from smaller and Division II schools. And what can we do with them? that the USFL really started to revolutionize.
Right. Guys like Richard Johnson, Ricky Sanders, stuff like that. Right.
Yeah. Gary
Yeah.
Clark.
Yeah. Gary Clark. Right. Exactly. So many, all guys that went to the NFL and did well.
Yeah. And I mean, Lindy Infante with the Jacksonville Bulls.
Right.
Later on became the coach of Green Bay, but he was a guy, he was an offensive coordinator in Cincinnati. He comes over to the USFL. He was an outside of the box thinker. And they really did something. Did you say you didn't know where Richard Johnson went?
Did he go to the NFL? I don't remember.
Yeah, he went to the Detroit Lions and actually was pretty decent for a while, but he wasn't that fast and he was a little portly, so he didn't last that long, but he was okay.
Yeah. See, I don't even remember that. So you got me on that. I didn't realize Richard Johnson went to the,
I'm a nerd.
The NFL. Yeah.
I'm sure I'm like you. We're about the same age. I can't tell you where my car keys are, but I can tell you that Richard Johnson played for the Detroit Lions.
Oh, yeah. I could tell you that the Generals fell a yard short of that first down on their last drive in the opening game. And I still think the ref gave him a bad spot. I'll go to my grave with that one.
And if you found the ref right now and brought it up to him, he'd be like, Sonny, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Absolutely not. You're right about that. So new USFL. Followed a little bit. You've been watching?
I followed it at the beginning. I don't know if you're going to like this, but can I give my honest take?
Of course. That's why we're here.
Okay. I hated that all the games were played in Birmingham. I thought that was utterly preposterous. It made no sense whatsoever. And like, you can't have, you're basically like, I understand there were complications. It was a TV driven league. I totally get the whole thing. The optics of empty stadiums is not a good optic at all, ever. And number two is you eliminate any local coverage whatsoever. So if you have the quote unquote New Jersey Generals playing in Birmingham, Alabama, well, the New York Times, the Daily News, opposed WFAN, 1050 ESPN, they're not going to cover it because it's not really a home team. It's a home team only in name.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge, huge problem because regional loyalty matters. And especially with quote unquote minor leagues, I always think the only shot, I get asked this a lot, like, can a football team league come along and be successful? Well, the only way it's going to be successful is, number one, if you take markets that the NFL isn't in. Like, I think mid-level cities are uber important and the only way to do it. I think you have a team in Portland, Oregon, you have a team in Memphis, Tennessee, you have a team in White Plains, New York, you have a team in Omaha, Nebraska. I think if you do that, and I do think the original USFL idea of taking the local players and having them on those teams is a very smart idea. So you draw regional fan interest.
Right.
This just felt, and I hated the, and this might me being 100 years old. I really didn't like the drone camera angles. I thought the idea was revolutionary and fun. I thought the execution was dizzying and annoying.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And also I'll tell you one more thing, and now I'm sorry, now stop.
No, it's good.
I hated how, like, early on, I actually reached out to the president of the league, maybe, or I can't remember which guy it was. And I said, hey, my name's Jeff Pearlman. I wrote this book about the USFL. I don't know if you've read it or not, but I'd be happy to send you a copy. And the guy hadn't read it, didn't seem to care about it. And I'm not offended personally. Like, he's who the hell am I? But like, you're literally starting a league called the USFL with teams named the same as the old. There's no logical reason to do that if you're not tying it to the history. And they avoided the history 1,000,000% altogether. Sam Mills gets into the Hall of Fame, not a peep from the USFL. And I know they were deliberately doing this for legal reasons because they were concerned about copyright infringement. But I just didn't get it. Like, why are you the USFL again? Like, why aren't you calling yourself? No, I don't know. So that was it. I'm not saying the play was bad. I know some of the play was excellent, but it was confusing to me.
Yeah. And listen, that everything you just listed is legitimate, right? Entire season in Birmingham. There was one home team, obviously the Birmingham Stallions, right? So they drew the crowds for their game. So every team got to play in front of a crowd once during the year, at least, right? So I think you'll see that in the next season and then 2 seasons, they'll start branching out into home markets because that is the goal. They're not staying in one place forever. I think it was a financial thing first and foremost, and then a good way for them to just build a foundation. And then the other thing you brought up, which would be really cool, the original USFL had that territorial draft where players that went to a group of schools located in the vicinity of the home team were bound to kind of be drafted by that organization. And it made for fan interest to increase a little bit because guys they cheered for on the collegiate level were playing.
You have to do that. I actually think I think you have to. I think if you put a team in Omaha, just as an example, I think
Yeah.
Omaha is a perfect market actually for football. It's a cool city. It's a mid-size. It's a passionate football town. And if you loaded that team with a bunch of guys who played at Nebraska and maybe other, conference schools, and and also like you have to promote the idea that these guys, like I think the regional element is hugely important. I really do. I don't see any other way around it. You have a team in Florida in a non-NFL city. You make sure all the players there went to Florida, Florida State, maybe even Georgia if you never do. It just makes perfect sense. My question for you
Yeah.
is this league, the new USFL, seems so based on TV. I wonder, do they even really honestly care about the complications of actually having these teams in home cities? Is that even really a concern for them, or is that a fake concern for them?
Their goal is to get in front of home markets. They know they're not going to be able to last as a league just playing in Birmingham every year for 10 weeks out of the year and expect that people in New Jersey are going to latch on to start following a team just because they have the name New Jersey, like you said, affixed to them. It's not enough of a draw, right? They've got to play at Rutgers Stadium, or they've got to play at Red Bull Arena or at MetLife somewhere so they can be experienced in person, so that they can ingratiate themselves with the community, because that was what the original USFL was really big about, was having players show up at an auto parts store or show up at an ice cream store opening or whatever it was. It was a little, it was kind of a little hometown feel back in those days. It was different than today, but the idea is the same.
I think one thing that gets lost in the original USFL ideas story is that it was actually a brilliant idea. Like, it actually was a brilliant idea. Like, all right, we're going to play in the spring. We're not going to play in the fall. So we're not going head to head against the NFL. We're going to go into a lot of new markets. We're going to go, we're going to go into Oakland because the Raiders left, right? And we're going to go, we're going to go into Arizona where there's no team. Like, we're going to go into markets where there's no team right now. We're going to have regional drafts. So you're going to identify with the players. The original idea was we're not trying to go head to head with the NFL. We're just trying to get a foothold. Hopefully we're going to draft some players and woo them to the league. We'll draft one or two. In a way, I think the argument can be made that Herschel Walker was a mistake, that even though he was a great player and the biggest name in football, he really changed the landscape for what the USFL was about with one signing. Like, he wasn't the model. The model wasn't, we're going to steal these guys who are going to go to the NFL. The model was slow growth, take our time. And as soon as Herschel Walker jumped in, and then you get Craig James, and then you get Tim Spencer, and then you get all these guys, it really caused the USFL to speed up a process that should have been a slow and steady wins a race kind of process.
It shattered the model, and they were doing things in year one and in year two, like expanding, for example, that they shouldn't have been doing until year 4, 5, and 6.
7, 9. I mean,
correct.
Expanding in year 2 was a huge mistake, and
it was a money grab, right?
It was a 100% money grab. I can't call it a mistake because they knew exactly what they were doing, which is trying to grab and go. But like, the minute you expand into San Antonio, Texas, with an owner who you haven't vetted, you're just like shooting yourself. You're dooming yourself to failure. And they went into some markets, and also like they went into markets that just logistically made no sense. Like, why do you have a team in Pittsburgh when the Steelers own that city, or always going to own that city? Even Houston, where they drew pretty well for it. Like, you're not going to compete with the Oilers. It is an impossibility. You're not going to steal fans from them. It doesn't make sense. Again, markets like Omaha, Memphis, which they did, Arizona, which they did. They were smart markets, but then they just did some really stupid shit that ruined that league.
Yeah, it was your book chronicles it well. Jim Byrne chronicled it well. The Trial chronicled it well, which basically the USFL was death by 1,000 cuts, and then the 1,001st cut was the try to sue the NFL. So that was the end of our beloved USFL in 1985. But I got to tell you, when they announced that this new league was starting and the Generals were back, hey, I jumped all in, full knowing it wasn't going to be anything like the first go around, right? That's unrealistic. The landscape today of pro sports just does not allow for another league to come up with NFL style salaries to get guys to jump over. So watching this league develop, Jeff, and, not fully on the inside, but knowing some people and knowing kind of what they have planned, it's pretty exciting to see that they're taking it into a second year, that these teams did create some buzz, that they did have generally acceptable television ratings for the time frame of the year that they're on. It's exciting to me to see that the name, the New Jersey Generals, is going to continue, and hopefully within the next couple of years will result in 5 home games being played right here in the state, and that would be pretty cool.
Let me ask you a few things. Number one, I just want to say, like, you touched on something that I feel all the time, which is the power of nostalgia is very strong.
Right.
It is. It just is. And like, as much as I'm like skeptical of this USFL, I am kind of like you. Like, I like seeing the uniforms. I like seeing the names. It does something for me. If it's nonsense or not nonsense, it still does something for me. It just does. It reminds me of being a kid, and that's really cool. Let's say the Generals actually play in New York, New Jersey.
Right.
They can't do it at MetLife Stadium, right? That'd be ridiculous, right? Do you do it at Rutgers, or Rutgers play that? Do you do it at Penn? Princeton? Excuse me. Like, where do you do it if you're the Generals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually wrote an article about that about a month ago or so, trying to list possibly the best 4 locations in the state, and everything you just named was on the list. I put MetLife on there just because it's there and it's always a possibility, but it's cavernous, and they're not going to draw 40,000 people the first year they play there. So it would be a really quiet place with an insignificant.
And that's a bad crowd. Look.
And
that's a really bad look if you have 2,000 people in a 50,000 seat stadium. It's a horrible look.
Yeah, even if it's 20,000, it's going to be hard for them to blend, right? Yeah. Or stand out against the empty seats. The other location, I like Red Bull Arena out there in Harrison, which is about 24,000. The only problem there is that USFL season's at the same time as MLS and NWSL soccer. So they're very careful about their fields. And so 5 American football home games might be too much during that time of year. So maybe that's not a realistic location. The other 2 locations, Rutgers obviously is a great spot because of its location to the central part of the state. 50 some odd thousand seats. It wouldn't look as bad if you have 20,000 in the stands in that kind of setup. And the 4th one is Princeton, which has a nice little stadium, right? 27,000 seats. The problem there is Princeton's kind of tucked away there on the further reaches of the state. It's not as accessible highway wise. Parking's kind of a issue around there if you're going to try to get big crowds. I mean, they don't draw massive crowds for Princeton games anyway. And a lot of the people are probably more from walking distance students and that kind of thing. So I don't know if it really has the infrastructure for a pro team to call home, but it's only 5 home games. So you never know what they have up their sleeve.
All right. 2 thoughts. Number one, you could also do Columbia, which would be kind of interesting. Have them play in
the city. Yeah.
Sure. Which isn't a horrible idea, And then the other is the one thing about having a TV network that vested in your league is you could really just, it's cheap, it's a stunt, but you load up one side of the stadium with fans and you just really show that side of the stadium, which is an old trick.
Been done, right? Yeah.
Different leagues have done, and it kind of works. It's kind of silly, but you do what you got to do.
Yeah. But in general, it seems like they have a plan. It's already in effect for the next year. They're laying the bricks for what's going to happen in March and April when the season kicks off. So it should be a lot of fun. I think you're going to see at least a couple more markets be involved in terms of hosting games next year.
I mean, at the end of the day, honest to God, like more than anything, it's jobs. Like it's jobs for football players, and it's hard for me to root against ultimately like employing people. So, and people being able to live out their dream, even if it's not their dream, it's a dream to play professional football. And I think that's cool. And so hopefully it works out.
And it has been cool. I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of Generals players, especially this new wave of free agents that they've been signing since the season ended. And these are all the young guys that are just hungry for opportunity, and they just want to play ball, and they want to show the world that they have skills worthy of getting a look at the next level. And they're just a bunch of hard workers, man, and they deserve these chances. And I'm rooting for every one of them, whether they're on the Generals or the Stars or the Panthers or whatever. This league is very much like the old USFL was, Jeff. If you remember, you kind of rooted for all the teams in a weird way. You cared about all of them in one form or other, because of the personalities or the players, or just because it was so new. How could you dislike anybody there? And
yeah,
so,
I don't know. Oh, wait, I have the Generals roster in front of me, and this is what I love. I'm not going to name the names, but like, here's a list of colleges just in alphabetical order of some players.
Yeah.
Like Florida A&M, Western Kentucky, Charlotte, Elizabeth City State, Towson, Michigan State, Texas Southern. Like that's what I really do love is that guy. Cause I went to Delaware, right? I love seeing guys from schools like that getting shots.
Right. Right.
I
They're
love
not picking them from the Nebraskas and from the Florida States and from the Tennessees. Although some of the players have
Sure.
that pedigree as well. That's just unavoidable. But most of them are from places you haven't heard from, but have exhibited the ability to perform on this level because they're looking for players that play on this level and can be coached to the next one.
Right. I agree with you. I think it's cool. I'm with you.
So you wrote a new book. It's coming out pretty soon. It's about one of my favorite athletes of that era when we were growing up. Who was better than Bo Jackson in the early to mid and late 80s, Jeff?
If you talk about dual sports, nobody. I mean, you could go Deion Sanders as maybe if Bo is one, Deion Sanders is a far distant, number two.
Right.
I mean, the guy's, as I always say, he ran a 4.13 40. He never lifted weights. He played two sports. He's the only guy to ever be a Pro Bowler and an All-Star Major League Baseball and Pro Bowl. He in his first Major League at bat. This is actually something I love. His first Major League at bat happened September 2nd, 1986, Kansas City Royals, Chicago White Sox. Steve Carlton, 321 game winner, future Hall of Famer on the mound. Bo hits a grounder to second, beats it out. He's clocked running 3.6 to first, which is the second fastest time ever for a right-handed hitter. It's his first at bat. He's asked after the game what it means to have his first hit off of Steve Carlton, and he has no idea who the guy is. I know who he was. Never heard of him. It's like Bo is just, and the mythology of the man, like what could have been? That's the number one question. Like what could have been? Who could he have been? If he wound up Herschel Walker, it's not nearly as interesting. The fact that we don't know what would have happened adds to the mythology of it all.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the title of your book, The Last Folk Hero, The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson. And the myth is the part we never got to see, right? After that injury in that playoff game against Cincinnati, I think it was 1990. 91. All right, 90 season, I think 90 calendar year, 1991, right? Yeah. And the hip injury, and we never saw the same Bo again after that play.
It's actually interesting to say that about the myth because I think of it somewhat differently, but that makes sense too. I think the myth is there's so many things that he did that weren't recorded because, it's the pre-cell phone era. So like there's this mythology about him. Like I opened the book when he was at the Chicago White Sox, the team's plane caught on fire and they were flying back from California. And a bunch of guys told me the plane's on fire and Bo Jackson's in the cockpit. And all of a sudden the door of the cockpit opens and Bo Jackson comes marching out. And he's like, everything's going to be okay, guys. Everything's going to be okay. Guys, players are freaking out. There's flames at the side of the plane. We're going to be okay. We're going to be, everyone take your seats. And people said it was the most heroic thing they ever saw. But then I talked to some other guys who said, no. Bo is sitting in the main cabin. The plane catches on fire. Bo runs up to help them in the cockpit. I'm like, that's a mythology of the guy. Did he come out of the cockpit to calm people down? Did he run up to the cockpit? But the thing that's undeniable is they made an emergency landing in Des Moines, Iowa. And there was a kiosk that was closed with some food. It was closed. And Bo Jackson, there's a keg with a lock on it. And Bo Jackson broke off the lock with his bare hands and they all drank out of this keg. So like, there's just a lot of mythology about the man. So it really is both. Like what could have been, who could he have become, but also like all these things. And it's like, did he do that? Did he really hit that ball 700 feet? Is that even possible? Well, 5 people say he did, but did he really? That's kind of the joy of it all.
Yeah, and how can we doubt that if there's so many people corroborating some version of it? And whether he went into the cockpit, Jeff, or came out of the cockpit, everyone can agree Bo did something.
He did something.
He did something.
Was calm when everyone else was freaking out. Why? I mean, there's a one of my favorite stories is when he was a junior at Auburn. He played baseball, football, also ran track at Auburn, qualified for the Olympic trials as a runner in track, like at 220 pounds, which is
wow.
He's playing baseball. First night game ever at the University of Georgia. And they bring in the Auburn. And Bo Jackson is playing right field. And the fans behind the fence in right field are just booing him mercilessly, mocking him, everything you could think of. And his first at bat, he grounds out. The fans mock him, blah, blah, blah. It's the first night game ever at the University of Georgia. Second at bat, Bo hits a ball. It travels over the wall and hits the lights, actually hits the lights. This is 39 days before The Natural comes out in theaters. So like, and then Oh, he runs back to the outfield at the end of the inning. All the fans are doing the bow down to Bo Jackson. He hits 2 more home runs in his next 2 at bats. In his last at bat, he doubles, and all the fans boo him because all he does
didn't hit a homer.
is hit a home run. It's just like there's a million great, amazing Bo Jackson mythology stories. It's so fun.
You know, and you know, he was just one of a kind in that era where he stood out when he was at Auburn. Just from a football standpoint, it was appointment television every week to watch the Auburn game wherever it was televised, and then you had that incredibly close Heisman race with Chuck Long from Iowa.
Wait, did you have to look that up, or do you know that?
No, I don't look things up, Jeff.
Man, you and I need to get a life. You and I are the 2 guys who need to get a life.
The closest Heisman race, right? We do need lives. And I think they were separate. Who was third? Wasn't it Gordy Lockbaum?
No, it was Robbie Bosco. Robbie Bosco third.
From BYU. Right. Robbie Bosco from BYU, the national champs that year.
No, they were not that year.
85 national champs.
Were they?
Yeah, 11-0, Robbie Bosco.
All right, I apologize. Good work.
That's all right. We're on and we're off here, but this is good, right? This is really good stuff. So, you know, Bo was a guy who he wins that razor thin close margin over Chuck Long. And, you know, as close as they were in that Heisman race, they couldn't have more disparate NFL careers, even as short as Bo's was. It was probably still longer than Chuck Long's.
Yeah. It's funny. I interviewed Chuck for this. The 3 guys invited to the Heisman ceremony that were Bo, Chuck Long, Lorenzo White from Michigan State.
Right.
And it was narrow. It was a razor thin margin between Long and Bo. Chuck Long told me he didn't have his speech written, and he's going up in the elevator, and his girlfriend, who's now his wife, says, you know, you probably should have something written in case you win. And he's like, I don't know. And she's like, really, you should. And he's scribbling down on a napkin. He writes this all down. And Bo wins, and Lorenzo White for years has said he and Chuck Long split the vote from the conference. And if Lorenzo White hadn't had such a good year, Chuck Long probably wins that Heisman Trophy. And I think he does. And the other thing that's interesting about that Heisman vote is during that season, I'm sure you remember this because you seem just like me, Sports Illustrated ran a cover, and it was 3 guys on the cover. It was Bo Jackson in the little box, Chuck Long in the little box, and Joe Dudek of Plymouth State with a check next to Dudek. And it said, hand him the Heisman. And it made the argument why Joe Dudek of Division III Plymouth State should win the Heisman Trophy. And it basically, the article mocked Bo Jackson for being soft and injury prone and not playing hard. And it really, in hindsight, I didn't realize this at the time, was kind of disgusting. It was kind of like, here's the white scrappy guy at the New England school who plays hard and he had to be taken off the field in an ambulance. And here's the African-American gifted athlete who doesn't have the heart, blah, 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 blah. And, but it had an impact. And Dudek, Division III Plymouth State, wound up placing 9th in the Heisman vote that year. So
all because of that.
Oh, 100%. He wouldn't have gotten a single vote if not for the Sports Illustrated cover. And Dudek wound up playing as a replacement guy in the NFL and is a wonderful guy, but like he didn't deserve the Heisman. I mean, it's utterly preposterous.
No, or even to be considered. Like he took someone else's 9th place position in that vote, you know.
And also like put Bo Jackson on a Division III school in 1985, and he probably runs for 7,000 yards.
Right.
Not exaggerating. He actually probably runs for 7,000 yards.
No, that's not an exaggeration. I mean, he was that unbelievably unstoppable, right? But, you know, it goes back to what you mentioned, Jeff, that there was that not so veiled racism, which was very commonplace, especially in sports, whether it was coming from organizations like, you know, blacks can't play quarterback, that crap, which was going on all the way into the 80s until Doug Williams finally shut everybody up. Those sort of not so veiled knocks have and had existed for so long.
Let me tell you about Auburn when he was at Auburn. So, okay, Bo Jackson's at Auburn. Head coach is Pat Dye. Pat Dye's a decent guy. He's, you know, he's from the South, but he's open-minded for that era and for who he was. But African-American football players were allowed to date white women. However, no one could know about it. Like it was made very clear. You can't be seen with your white girlfriend. You can't be walking around. And all the athletes lived in a dormitory. Sewell Hall was the athletic dormitory at Auburn. And there was one year they were doing construction on the dormitory, and all the athletes were placed in trailers outside the town. And I interviewed, he died actually a few months ago, but Lionel James. Do you remember Lionel James?
Little Train. Sure. Absolutely.
You're the guy, I'm telling you. And
Thank you.
Yeah, you're the first guy when I'm like, remember Lionel James? And you get these blank looks. I knew you would know.
San Diego Chargers.
Right. And he played with Bo at Auburn. And he told me he died tragically. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. It sucks he died. He told me Bo, Lionel, and another teammate were put in a trailer. And Pat Dye said, I know you guys are dating white women. It's fine. It's your right. I'm going to put your trailer far away from campus so people are unaware of this. When Bo was at Auburn, there was a fraternity that had something called the Old South Festival. And what it was, they'd have a parade. And in the parade, all the members of the fraternity would dress up in Civil War outfits, soldier outfits, ride horses down the street. Their girlfriends would dress up in these antebellum dresses, and they would hire local African-American kids to be slaves.
Unreal.
That is how messed up it was. And the interesting thing is when he was at Auburn, like the players, black and white, were in a cocoon, basically. They all lived in the athletic dorm. They were fed shrimp and lobster and blah, 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 and steak. So like I interviewed one of the girlfriends of one of the players, and she said she used to say to her boyfriend, who was African-American, she'd be like, you don't know what it's like to be black here at Auburn. He's like, no, I know what it's like. She's like, no, you don't know what it's like. If you were a black student at Auburn, you basically went to Tuskegee on weekends to go party because you weren't hanging out with white students, weren't really welcome in white clubs. It was this really divided world. And it's funny, Lionel James said this to me. He said, I didn't really think of it at the time, but like he said, there was a game against Florida where he said he broke every finger on his hand. And he thought later, he's like, do you guys really love me when you're cheering for me? Or am I just, he said, am I just the N-word with a football? Wow. And I think a lot of these guys were. I don't think parents wanted their daughters dating them. They certainly didn't want them marrying them. They probably didn't want them socializing with them. As long as you carry the football and do a great job, we love you, but don't date our daughters. It was a gross period, man. It really was.
Yeah. I've heard a couple tales. I won't repeat the stories, but I had a friend or two that played college football during that time and experienced one or two incidences in the Deep South that are similar to what you described, and even a little bit worse. And these were the norm in those days. And a lot of it wasn't questioned.
There was I wrote Walter Payton's biography. It's called
Sweetness. I love it.
Thank you. And there was a term that they used to use. Now, Walter Payton was, 8 years before Bo Jackson, 10 years before Bo Jackson. But the term they'd use is give the ball to Leroy, or just give the ball to Leroy. And what it basically meant was just give the black guy the ball. Like, stop complaining about him being here. Don't just give the ball to Leroy. And it's so freaking disgusting and disturbing that they just saw these guys as chattel and pieces of meat and didn't care one iota about them and didn't want them in the classrooms and didn't want them dating their daughters. But hey, they can get us a win on Sunday against Ole Miss. So, and there's a lot of disturbing, messed up stuff, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate, but it's a real part of the game and the sport and the history, and it's got to be talked about so people can understand it, so we don't repeat crap like that.
I agree 100%.
For sure. Sure. Something I was thinking about Bo.
Okay.
Obviously, it couldn't have been done because he played baseball during the spring, but I always felt like he was exactly the kind of personality, exactly the kind of athlete that would have been perfect for the USFL in 85, 86, 87, if there was a USFL in those days. And obviously, if Bo wasn't necessarily playing baseball. Birmingham
Stallions approached him and made him a silent offer that he turned down. And this was when the USFL was really starting to crumble. So it wasn't, well, they actually made the offer in 84. It was 84 when he was a junior that they made the offer. And I guess at the time you could still say it was kind of viable. Stallions had Joe Cribbs already, another Auburn running back.
Yeah.
They had Cliff Stout, a quarterback. They were a good team. Jimmy Smith, a wide receiver. I don't think Bo ever took it particularly seriously. I don't think number one, like his mom really wanted him to get a degree from Auburn. That was very important. He ultimately did. He didn't at the time, but he ultimately did. And I just don't think he considered it a serious offer, but it was put out there.
I never heard that before either. So another cool nugget.
I'm here for you.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Jeff, before we go, I do have one more question for you. So I bought a jersey before this USFL season started, and it was a throwback jersey, and it's a Herschel Walker jersey. And, Herschel Walker's running for Senate now, and it may not necessarily be the right jersey to be wearing anymore, depending on how you feel about certain things in the world. If I was to get another jersey for next year, throwback, original Generals, there's 3 seasons to choose from. Yep. What am I getting?
Okay. First of all, I want to say, I'm not saying you have to agree with me, but I'm in silent prayer that Herschel Walker does not win that Senate seat because he's insane. And he's one of my all-time favorite football players. I have no beef with Herschel Walker as a human. I really don't. But something's wrong with that guy. Um, I was thinking Maurice Carthon, the 33.
Right.
It's cool. But then I thought, he was also a Giant. Maybe that's not. Okay, I think you got to go 26, Gary Barbaro.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Barbaro was great. Came up from Kansas City. It was a very important addition. And the other one I would consider is number 17, Brian Sipe. I just think it's kind of cool to have a Brian Sipe Generals jersey.
I thought about that one too. Brian Sipe is a good one just because he represented their new direction when they brought him aboard, and he was a former NFL MVP in 1980. So why not? The other guy I was thinking about, and it's really deep and obscure, and no one even knows him, they had a tight end by the name of Victor Hicks, number 87, I believe, right? Yeah. And the only reason I would choose that is because when I was a kid growing up in central New Jersey, my old man had a lunch truck sitting across from the A&P warehouse for 40 years. And so I used to work there in the summer. And Victor Hicks worked in the warehouse at the A&P over the summer in the off seasons. And he used to be a customer of ours. So he used to come to the lunch truck. I would talk to him every day. He brought me an autographed photo of the team. So I just got a soft spot in my heart for tight end Victor Hicks.
I don't know if you think the way I do. The only flaw with the Victor Hicks plan, I guess it's the same as almost any of these guys' plan, is like nobody's going to know who he is. And people would and the jersey is so nondescript. The General's jersey is not an overly, that people are going to assume it was like, your name is Hicks and you're the loser wearing his high school football jersey 30 years later.
Well, I did consider that too, because you're right. There's not a super distinctive thing about the original General's New Jersey. I actually thought of getting a Bobby Scott jersey just because why not? He was the first QB.
Chain smoking backup quarterback, former Saint. Love it.
Yeah, he's fun. I chat with him on Twitter from time to time, and he'll share stories with me. And he's really, really open. If people follow on Twitter, he's a good follow just because if you ask him a question, he'll answer it, which is fun.
Yeah. I support all your choices.
Yeah, fantastic. Jeff, this was fantastic, man. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do it. I've been reading your stuff for years, and getting an opportunity to converse like this is awesome for me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Let's do it again sometime.
I'm in.
Jeff Pearlman, ladies and gentlemen, again, the book, it's about Bo Jackson, and it is called The Last Folk Hero, The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson by Jeff Pearlman. Don't go away. Generally Speaking, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Generally Speaking. How great was that? Jeff Pearlman was a fantastic guest. The guy thinks I know more than him about the USFL when it's exactly the other way around. But it's still a great compliment when someone of that stature tells you that he respects your knowledge. So that was pretty cool for me. This is a guy I've been reading since his SI days, actually, and I have read a bunch of his books. And I've pre-ordered this Bo Jackson book, and I'm really looking forward to receiving that on the day that it comes out. That is it for this edition of Generally Speaking. Make sure you keep an eye out for my next show, because it's going to have another great guest. I promise it's going to be a fun one. So look out for that. See you next time.